Professor Marcus Webb had seen a lot of weird things in his 15 years teaching xenobiology, but nothing quite prepared him for the sight of crickets trying to take notes with tentacles while simultaneously eating what appeared to be a live fish. The Aquarian exchange student had been at Earth's first intergalactic university for 3 months now, and Webb was pretty sure the smell wasn't getting any better. "Professor Webb," gurgled Crix, pausing mid-fish crunch, "when do we study actual dangerous creatures? These Earth animals you show us are pathetic." Webb looked up from his tablet where he'd been grading papers that ranged from brilliant to how did this species achieve interstellar travel. Sitting in the front row, Vorthak pulsed a soft blue light that Webb had learned meant either agreement or mild digestive distress. The crystalline Luxarian was harder to read than a terms of service agreement, but at least he didn't smell like low tide. "Define dangerous, Crix," Webb said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of smile that made his human students nervous. Xena fluttered her massive moth-like wings, creating a breeze that thankfully dispersed some of Crix's fish aroma. "On Lepidoptera prime, our shadow wings hunt at near light speed in complete darkness. They can detect prey from 3 star systems away." Her voice had that wispy quality that made everything sound like she was sharing cosmic secrets, even when she was just asking for the bathroom pass. "Impressive," Webb nodded, making a note on his tablet. "And Vorthak, what about your home world?" The crystalline being's faceted body shifted through a spectrum of colors before settling on a confident amber. "Diamond claws on Luxaria can slice through starship hulls with their talons. They hunt in packs of 50 and have never known defeat." Webb tapped his stylus against his desk, that same unsettling smile growing wider. "Never known defeat. That's a bold claim." "It's not a claim," Crix interjected, tentacles waving dismissively. "It's fact. Earth creatures are soft, slow, and frankly embarrassing. My cousin's pet algae could probably take down your largest predator." The other students in the mixed species class murmured agreement. Webb had taught enough alien exchange students to recognize the pattern. They all came to Earth expecting to find a primitive backwater planet filled with inferior life forms. Most of them learned otherwise eventually, though usually not in the way they expected. "Well then," Webb said, closing his tablet with a decisive snap, "I think it's time for a field trip." Xena's antenna twitched with curiosity. "Where are we going?" "The zoo," Webb announced cheerfully. The collective groan from his students was universal, transcending species barriers. Apparently the concept of educational but boring was truly galactic. "Professor," Vorthak pulsed a dim red, "we did not travel across the galaxy to look at Earth's domesticated pets in cages." "Oh, they're not domesticated," Webb said, gathering his things. "Trust me on that one. And Crix, you might want to leave the fish here. Where we're going, you don't want to smell like prey." The Aquarian's tentacles froze mid-wave. "Prey? What do you mean prey?" But Webb was already heading for the door, humming an old Earth tune under his breath. Behind him, he could hear his students scrambling to follow, their previous confidence replaced by the first whispers of uncertainty. Perfect. Class was about to get interesting. The Metroplex Zoo on a Tuesday afternoon was about as exciting as watching paint dry in zero gravity, which made it perfect for Webb's purposes. His students clustered around him like a badly coordinated parade float, drawing stares from human visitors who were clearly trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate cosplay convention. "Behold," Crix announced dramatically, gesturing with 3 tentacles toward a family of meerkats, the mighty predators of Earth. "I'm trembling with fear." Xena giggled, a sound like wind chimes in a tornado. "They're actually quite adorable. On my world we'd keep them as decorative pets for our larvae." Webb checked his map and started walking toward the big cat section, his students trailing behind like skeptical ducklings. "Tell me more about these legendary creatures from your homeworlds. I'm fascinated by comparative apex predator behaviors." Vorthak's crystalline body flashed a brilliant gold which Webb had learned meant he was about to lecture someone. "The Leviathan crushers in Crix's oceans can grow to the size of your space stations. They've been known to swallow entire battle cruisers that venture too deep into Aquarian waters. Accidentally, of course," Crix added, though his tone suggested the accidents weren't entirely unwelcome. "They mistake the ships for large fish, very large metal fish that explode when digested." "Charming," Webb muttered, making another note. "And these diamond claws you mentioned, Vorthak." The Luxarian's pride literally radiated from his faceted surface. "Apex crystalline predators, they hunt in the deep caverns of Luxaria where the pressure would crush your human bodies instantly. Their talons are sharper than molecular blades and they can track prey through solid rock by detecting microscopic vibrations." "They sound terrifying," Webb said in a tone that suggested he was humoring a child's monster stories. Xena fluttered ahead of the group, her massive wings casting dancing shadows on the pathway. "The shadow wings are poetry in motion, Professor. They exist partially in your dimension and partially in shadow space. When they hunt, they can phase through solid matter and strike from impossible angles. No prey has ever escaped a shadow wing hunt. Never, Webb asked, raising an eyebrow. Never. All three aliens said in unison, with the kind of certainty usually reserved for universal constants like the speed of light or the fact that cafeteria food was terrible on every planet. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a large enclosure surrounded by reinforced barriers and warning signs in 17 different languages. Webb stopped walking and turned to face his students with that same unsettling smile. "Well then," he said cheerfully, "I'd like you to meet some of Earth's adorable house cats." The students looked through the barriers and saw a massive orange and black striped creature lounging in the shade, easily the size of a small spacecraft. It yawned, revealing teeth that could probably be used as emergency landing gear. "That," Webb announced with obvious pleasure, "is a tiger." Crix's tentacles went very still. "House cat?" Zena's voice had lost some of its dreamy quality, and gained a note of concern. "Professor, that creature is enormous." Webb pulled out his tablet and began reading in the tone of someone discussing the weather. "Adult male Siberian tiger. Average weight, 600 pounds. Length, 10 feet not counting the tail. Oh, and this particular specimen, his name is Boris. He's actually on the smaller side." The tiger in question chose that moment to stand up and stretch, muscles rippling under his striped coat like geological formations shifting. Boris was definitely not built for cuddling. "Still not impressed," Crix said, though his tentacles had retreated closer to his body. "Size isn't everything. My Leviathan crushers are much larger." "True," Webb nodded agreeably. "But your Leviathan crushers hunt in open water where they can use their size advantage. Boris here is an ambush predator." Vorthak pulsed a questioning purple. "Meaning what, exactly?" Webb's smile took on an educational quality that somehow made it more disturbing. "Meaning he can move through dense jungle completely silently, despite weighing as much as a small vehicle. Tigers can leap horizontally, 25 feet and vertically 12 feet from a standing position. They have night vision 6 times better than humans, hearing so acute they can detect prey from 2 miles away, and jaws that exert 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch." The aliens exchanged glances. Even by their standards, those were respectable predator specifications. "But here's my favorite part," Webb continued, warming to his subject. "Tigers are one of the few creatures on Earth that actively hunt other apex predators. Not for survival, mind you, for territory. For sport. Sometimes just because they're having a bad day." "What do you mean, other apex predators?" Zena asked, her antennae twitching nervously. Webb consulted his tablet like he was reading a shopping list. "Oh, you know, crocodiles, bears, wolves, large sharks when tigers decide to go swimming. There's documented cases of tigers taking down saltwater crocodiles that were over 20 feet long. The crocodiles, by the way, have been apex predators for over 200 million years. They survived the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs." Boris chose that moment to look directly at the group, his orange eyes fixing on them with the kind of attention usually reserved for menu items. His tail twitched once, a subtle movement that somehow conveyed the impression of a loaded weapon. "And Boris here," Webb said conversationally, "he's just lounging around because he's already eaten today. When he's hungry, well, that's when things get interesting." Crix's tentacles had now formed what could only be described as a defensive formation. Surely these tigers have natural enemies. Creatures they avoid. Webb appeared to consider this seriously. "Well, there are a few things tigers tend to avoid. Active volcanoes, for instance. Deep ocean trenches, though mostly because they can't breathe underwater for extended periods. Oh, and humans, but only because we nearly hunted them to extinction." The silence that followed was the kind usually associated with funeral services or tax audits. "You hunted these creatures." Vorthak's colors shifted through several alarmed spectrums. "Past tense," Webb clarified helpfully. "We mostly stopped when we realized we were running out of tigers. Terrible for the ecosystem. You understand. Plus tourists pay good money to see them in zoos." Boris yawned again, a casual display of dental architecture that could probably be used to open cans, or spaceships. "Let me tell you about tiger hunting techniques," Webb said, settling into his lecture mode like a comfortable chair. "Because this is where it gets really fun." The word fun seemed to have different meanings to different species, based on the nervous shuffling of his students. "Tigers are what we call pursuit predators with ambush specialization. They'll stalk prey for hours, sometimes days, covering distances of up to 20 miles while remaining completely undetected. They study their targets' routines, learn their habits, identify their weaknesses. Xena's wings had folded tightly against her body. That sounds like military reconnaissance. Funny you should mention that, Webb said brightly. There are documented cases of tigers in India who learned to avoid human patrol routes, memorized guard schedules, and planned their attacks around human military operations. One tiger actually waited 3 days for a specific guard to go off duty because he'd learned that particular human was a better shot than the others. Vorthak's crystalline body had shifted to a dull gray, which Webb was pretty sure meant existential dread. You're suggesting these creatures engage in tactical planning. Oh, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you facts. Webb pulled up a holographic display from his tablet. Case study number 1, the Champawat tiger. This particular individual developed a taste for a specific type of prey and refined her hunting techniques over several years. She became so efficient at what she did that she was responsible for over 400 confirmed kills. 400 of what? Crix asked, though his tentacles suggested he really didn't want to know the answer. Humans, Webb said cheerfully. She specialized in hunting humans. The silence that followed was so complete that Webb could hear Boris breathing in his enclosure. But surely, Xena whispered, that was unusual behavior. An aberration. Well, she was particularly successful. I'll grant you that. But tigers hunting humans isn't aberrant behavior. It's opportunistic behavior. See, tigers are smart enough to recognize that humans are actually pretty easy prey in most circumstances. No natural armor, relatively slow, poor night vision, and they tend to panic when stalked properly. Webb gestured toward Boris, who was now pacing the length of his enclosure with fluid grace that made 2 tons of muscle and bone look like liquid shadow. The real problem is that tigers don't just hunt for food. They hunt for territory, for dominance, for entertainment, and sometimes just because they're in a bad mood. There's a documented case of a tiger in Russia who spent 3 days hunting a human who had shot at him. Not because he was hungry, but because he was offended. Offended, Vorthak's colors were now cycling through what looked like an entire spectrum of alarm. Tigers hold grudges, Webb explained matter-of-factly. They remember individual humans who have wronged them, sometimes for years. They'll track specific people across hundreds of miles of terrain and wait for the perfect moment to settle the score. There's a case where a tiger tracked a poacher who had killed his mate for 6 months, learned the man's daily routine, and then waited outside his house for him to come home. Crix's tentacles had formed what could only be described as a protective knot. And what happened? Well, let's just say the poacher learned why tigers are called apex predators. Webb's smile suggested that the learning experience had been brief but educational. But these are isolated incidents, Xena said hopefully. Surely most tigers are not so focused. Webb consulted his tablet again. Actually, behavioral studies suggest that all tigers are capable of this level of tactical thinking. They just usually don't need to use it because most of their natural prey doesn't require such sophisticated hunting techniques. A deer, for instance, doesn't carry weapons or build fortifications. He paused to let that sink in, watching his students' expressions carefully. But here's where it gets really interesting. Tigers are also capable of learning from other tigers. They pass hunting techniques down through generations, and they adapt their methods based on their environment and available prey. The tigers in the Sundarbans, for example, have learned to hunt in mangrove swamps where the ground is unstable and visibility is limited. They've developed techniques for aquatic ambushes that are so sophisticated that local fishermen have had to completely change their traditional fishing methods. Boris had stopped pacing and was now sitting directly in front of the group, his massive head tilted slightly as if he was listening to Webb's lecture. His orange eyes moved from one alien student to another with the kind of assessment usually reserved for inventory management. And that's just one tiger, Webb continued conversationally. There are currently about 4,000 tigers left in the wild on Earth. Each one is capable of everything I've just described. Each one is a highly intelligent, highly adaptable apex predator with the ability to plan, execute, and adapt hunting strategies that would make your military strategists proud. The alien students were now clustered together in what was obviously a defensive formation, though none of them seemed to realize they were doing it. Professor Webb, Crix said carefully, exactly how many of these creatures were there before humans started hunting them? Webb's smile reached maximum wattage. Conservative estimates suggest around 100,000 spread across Asia. But that's just tigers. We haven't even talked about the other big cats yet. The alien students had gone very quiet, which Webb recognized as the sound of worldviews crumbling. He decided it was time to deliver the final blow. But you know what the really fascinating part is? Webb continued. his tone suggesting he was about to share a delightful recipe rather than existential horror. Humans didn't hunt tigers because we were afraid of them. We hunted them because we were bored. Vorthak's crystalline body flickered through colors that didn't appear in any spectrum Webb recognized. Bored? Well, that's oversimplifying it a bit, Webb admitted. We also hunted them for their fur to make decorative rugs, their bones to make traditional medicine that didn't actually work, their teeth to make jewelry, and their heads to mount on walls as conversation pieces. You know, interior decorating. The silence that followed was so profound that Webb was pretty sure he could hear the aliens' various circulatory systems struggling to process this information. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Crix said slowly, his tentacles moving in what looked like a nervous system diagnostic. You're telling us that humans, who are smaller and weaker than tigers, hunted the tigers nearly to extinction not for survival but for home decoration. And because rich people thought it was fun, Webb added helpfully. Tiger hunting was considered a sport for nobility. They'd organize elaborate expeditions, invite their friends, make it a social event. There are photographs of humans posing with dozens of dead tigers like they were party favors. Zena's voice had become barely audible. How did humans manage to hunt these tactical geniuses? Webb pulled up another holographic display showing historical hunting scenes. Well, at first it was pretty difficult. Tigers are, as we've established, remarkably good at what they do. Early human hunters had to develop increasingly sophisticated techniques. They used bait animals, constructed elaborate blinds, employed teams of trackers, and developed specialized weapons. He gestured to an image of an ornate rifle. But then humans did what humans do best. We got creative with technology. We developed long-range weapons that could kill a tiger from distances the tiger couldn't even detect us. We invented vehicles that could outrun them. We created traps so sophisticated that even tiger intelligence couldn't anticipate them. But surely the tigers adapted. Vorthak pulsed hopefully. Oh, they tried, Webb said with something that might have been admiration. Some tigers learned to avoid human scents, to recognize the sound of human vehicles, to identify human traps. There are cases of tigers who became so human-aware that they changed their entire behavioral patterns. They became nocturnal when humans were active during the day, learned to avoid areas where humans had been recently, and even developed techniques for hunting humans while avoiding human weapons. He paused to let this sink in. The problem was that humans were adapting faster. See, tigers have to learn through individual experience and limited social transmission. Humans had books, schools, communications networks, and industrial manufacturing. When one human developed a better technique for hunting tigers, thousands of other humans could learn it immediately. Webb brought up a graph showing tiger population decline over time. The really remarkable thing is how quickly it happened. In less than 2 centuries, humans reduced tiger populations by over 90%, not through some massive military campaign or ecological disaster, but through what was essentially a very persistent hobby. Boris had been listening to this entire conversation, and Webb swore the tiger's expression had become somewhat judgmental, and this happened to other species as well. Zena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Oh, absolutely. Humans have driven hundreds of apex predators to extinction or near extinction. Lions, leopards, jaguars, bears, wolves, great white sharks, orcas. We've hunted creatures that ruled their ecosystems for millions of years down to remnant populations, usually within a few centuries of making contact with them. Webb gestured broadly at the zoo around them. This entire facility exists because humans realized we were running out of impressive animals to look at. We built these enclosures to preserve the species we'd nearly eliminated so our children could see what they looked like. You're keeping them as living museums, Crix said, and there was something like awe in his gurgling voice. Living museums that we charge admission to see, Webb corrected. Humans will pay money to observe creatures that their ancestors hunted for sport, while eating processed food and complaining about the weather. The aliens stood there in stunned silence, watching Boris pace his enclosure. The tiger seemed utterly unconcerned with the philosophical implications of his situation, though Webb noticed he kept glancing at the group with what looked like professional assessment. Professor Webb, Vorthak said finally, his colors shifting to what Webb had learned was deep contemplation. If humans nearly eliminated tigers, and tigers are capable of hunting our deadliest predators, then what does that make humans? Webb's smile became positively radiant. Well, that's an excellent question. What do you think it makes us? The alien students looked at each other, then at Boris, then at Webb, and Webb could practically see the equations rewriting themselves behind their various optical organs. Oh no, Zena whispered. her wings folding so tightly they nearly disappeared. Oh no no no. Webb watched his students process this information with the satisfaction of a teacher who had just watched the light bulb moment illuminate 3 very different types of consciousness. It was beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. Let me see if I can help you work through this, Webb said gently, like a therapist guiding someone through a breakthrough. Crix, you mentioned that your Leviathan crushers have never known defeat. How do you think they'd fare against a creature that can plan multi-day tactical operations, hold grudges for months, and adapt its hunting strategies based on individual prey behavior? Crix's tentacles had formed what could only be described as a stress ball. The Leviathan crushers rely on size and strength in open water. They're ambush predators, but they don't think like that. They react on instinct. And tigers think, Webb nodded approvingly. They problem solve. They innovate. There's a documented case of a tiger who learned to open car doors because he'd figured out that humans felt safer inside vehicles. He'd wait for people to get into their cars, then methodically work out how to get the doors open. Vorthak's entire crystalline structure was now pulsing in rapid panicked flashes. The diamond claws are nearly indestructible and hunt in coordinated packs, but they follow instinctual pack behaviors that have remained unchanged for millions of years. Exactly, Webb said encouragingly. Predictable patterns. Tigers would study those patterns, learn the pack dynamics, and figure out how to exploit them, probably within a few encounters. There's actually a case study of tigers in Nepal who learned to hunt Asiatic black bears, which are also pack animals with established territorial behaviors. And shadow wings, Zena said faintly, exist partially in shadow space, but they hunt according to the cosmic cycles of our binary star system. They're bound by celestial mechanics. Celestial mechanics are just another pattern to learn, Webb said with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics. Tigers have been observed changing their hunting schedules based on human work patterns, lunar cycles, seasonal variations, and even local traffic schedules. If your shadow wings follow predictable cosmic cycles, a tiger would probably have their timing figured out within a month. The 3 aliens stood there, looking like their respective species versions of people who had just discovered their insurance didn't cover alien invasion. But Professor, Crick said desperately, surely you're exaggerating, these are just Earth cats. Large Earth cats, granted, but still. Webb pulled up a new holographic display showing a world map with red dots scattered across it. Current tiger distribution. As you can see, they're mostly in India, China, Russia, and Southeast Asia. Now watch what happens when I show you historical distribution. The map exploded with red dots covering most of Asia, from Turkey to Indonesia, from the Caspian Sea to the islands of Bali and Java. Tigers adapted to virtually every ecosystem in Asia. Tropical rainforests, deciduous forests, grasslands, mangrove swamps, mountains up to 12,000 feet elevation, and Arctic regions where temperatures drop to -40 degrees. They figured out how to hunt in snow, in water, in dense jungle, and in open grasslands. They learned to take down prey ranging from fish to elephants. He gestured to Boris, who was now lying down but still watching the group with professional interest. Boris here is descended from Siberian tigers who learned to hunt in conditions that would kill most life forms on your planets. His ancestors figured out how to take down brown bears that outweighed them by hundreds of pounds, in temperatures that would freeze your various circulatory fluids solid. And humans eliminated them from most of those habitats. Vorthak said, though it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself that this wasn't actually happening. Humans eliminated them while simultaneously fighting wars against each other, building civilizations, developing art and literature, exploring space, and inventing new forms of entertainment. Webb said cheerfully. Tiger hunting was basically a weekend hobby for the species that was simultaneously splitting atoms and composing symphonies. Zena made a sound that was probably the moth equivalent of whimpering. What kind of species casually eliminates apex predators as a recreational activity while building interstellar civilizations? The kind of species, Webb said, his smile reaching levels that probably violated several Geneva Conventions, that gets selected to host the intergalactic university. The silence that followed was the kind usually associated with the heat death of the universe. Oh, Crick said in a very small voice. Oh, that's why. That's why. Webb confirmed. The Galactic Council didn't choose Earth because we were a primitive backwater planet that would be grateful for the honor. They chose Earth because any species that could casually hunt tigers to near extinction while simultaneously developing the technology to travel between stars was probably the kind of species you want to stay on good terms with. Vorthak had gone completely transparent, which Webb was pretty sure meant he was having an existential crisis. We've been thinking about this all wrong, We assumed Earth was chosen as a compromise location, somewhere neutral and non-threatening. Neutral, Webb chuckled. That's adorable. Earth is many things, but neutral isn't one of them. We're the species that looked at creatures like Boris and thought, you know what, these would look great as living room decorations. We're the species that figured out how to make apex predators extinct as a hobby project. He gestured around the zoo, where families were walking around eating ice cream and taking selfies with creatures that could theoretically hunt their home world's deadliest predators. And now we keep them in enclosures so our children can learn about biodiversity while consuming frozen dairy products. The human children aren't afraid of them. Xena observed with growing horror. Human children throw peanuts at them and complain when they don't do tricks, Webb said proudly. Human children have been known to climb into tiger enclosures because they wanted to pet the big kitty. The tigers are usually more surprised than anything else. Boris chose that moment to stand up, stretch again and wander over to the barrier where he settled down directly in front of the group. His massive head was maybe 6 feet away from them, separated only by reinforced barriers that suddenly seemed very, very inadequate. He's studying us, Crix whispered. Of course he is, Webb said conversationally. You're new, you smell interesting, and you've been talking about him for the last hour. Boris is curious. Tigers are naturally curious creatures. It's part of what makes them such effective hunters. The alien students stared at Boris. Boris stared back with the calm assessment of a professional evaluating a new challenge. For your homework assignment, Webb announced, consulting his tablet, I want you to research the selection criteria used by the Galactic Council when they chose Earth as the site for the Intergalactic University. Pay particular attention to the sections about species compatibility assessments and interspecies diplomatic considerations. He started walking toward the exit, leaving his students standing frozen in front of Boris's enclosure. Oh, and one more thing, Webb called back over his shoulder. Next week we're visiting the honey badger exhibit. You're going to love learning about creatures that hunt venomous snakes for fun and have been observed breaking into research facilities just to see what's inside. As Webb walked away, he could hear his students behind him, their voices carrying a new tone of respect mixed with what sounded suspiciously like terror. Do you think, Xena whispered, that Professor Webb was a predator hunter before he became a teacher? I don't think I want to know, Crix replied, his tentacles still knotted with stress. I think, Vorthak said, his colors shifting to a deep contemplative blue, that we need to completely reconsider our assumptions about this planet. Webb smiled as he walked toward the parking lot. Behind him, Boris yawned and settled down for a nap, having apparently found the alien students less interesting than his afternoon sleep schedule. Class dismissed.